I'm Gary Anthony Ramsay with your Hour News Now Rewind. Stories making headlines for the week ending December 11th, 2010. Our top stories include: the president cuts a deal on the Bush tax cuts, but House Democrats say not so fast, as they want changes made before they bring it to the floor. The president does sign a bill that finally settles the black farmers' lawsuit. In New Orleans, guilty verdicts for cops accused of shooting a man, then burning his body after Hurricane Katrina. The NAACP of Mississippi says a man found hanging by a noose did not kill himself. Nigeria issues an international arrest warrant for former Vice President Dick Cheney on bribery charges. And the ONN flashback looks at a hero's actions on the day that lived into infamy. Our top story: Barack Obama cuts a deal with Republicans that would extend the Bush tax cuts to all Americans, including millionaires and billionaires. The president said the deal was necessary to prevent a tax increase on millions of Americans while the economy is still in bad shape and millions remain unemployed.
I know there's some people in my own party and in the other party who would rather prolong this battle, even if we can't reach a compromise. But I'm not willing to let working families across this country become collateral damage for political warfare here in Washington.
The Democrats are calling the deal as is a sellout and are requiring major changes before they bring it to the House floor for a vote. They want the top-tier tax breaks removed, and they want the cap on the estate tax higher than the current level of 35%. Well, a deal the president did sign that Congress agreed to is a $4 billion measure that finally settles two outstanding lawsuits against the U.S. government. The president signs the Claims Resolution Act of 2010 into law. It pays more than 300,000 black farmers $1.1 billion. They successfully proved in court that the U.S. Department of Agriculture systematically discriminated against black farmers for decades. The act also resolves a $3 billion claim filed by American Indians, who proved in court the government and utility companies mismanaged billions of dollars in gas rights that belonged to them. In New Orleans, guilty verdicts for 3 cops accused in the shooting death of a black man and the effort to cover up the crime 4 years ago. Jurors in the federal civil rights case took 3 days to find Officer David Warren guilty of manslaughter in the death of 31-year-old Henry Glover. Prosecutors said Warren shot Glover in the back in the days after Hurricane Katrina, and that other officers participated in burning Glover's body and moving paperwork around to cover up the crime. Former Officer Greg McRae and Thomas McCabe were found guilty of the cover-up. Warren faces life in prison. The other officers face between 30 and 60 years behind bars. In Mississippi, could shades of the past be on the horizon? The death of a black man found hanging in a tree has many questioning whether it was suicide or murder. The body of Frederick Carter was found hanging from a tree in Greenwood, Mississippi last week. The death of the 29-year-old man was ruled a suicide after investigators said Carter had a history of mental illness and that autopsy results concurred with him taking his own life. But the NAACP isn't buying it, saying that Carter's body was found in a predominantly white neighborhood and that pictures of the scene raise doubts. A Boston nightclub is under investigation for bias after a private party being held for black alumni of Harvard and Yale was prematurely shut down. The organizers say it was closed after the manager accused the party of attracting too many, quote, gangbangers. The Massachusetts State Attorney General's office is investigating the Cure Lounge for racial discrimination. It's a newly opened nightclub in the basement of the Wilbur Theater. The group gathered for a prearranged party after the Harvard-Yale football game. Organizers say that the manager shut the party down and ejected everyone from the club for no reason. Club organizers say they saw local troublemakers on the line for the party and closed it for security reasons. In your Hour News Now World Wrap, Nigeria issues an international arrest warrant for former Vice President Dick Cheney on bribery charges. The warrant stems from his time as head of the controversial company known as Halliburton. The indictment alleges that Halliburton paid more than $180 million in bribes to Nigerian officials to secure the rights to a $6 billion natural gas plant. Cheney's lawyers deny the allegations, calling them, quote, baseless. In the Ivory Coast, international pressure builds against the leader of that country to step aside after an election the United Nations says that he lost. But there are no signs that Laurent Gbagbo will give in. He still controls the army and other key elements of the government. The United States has warned they would issue sanctions against Ivory Coast if he continues to claim that he's leader of that country. The African Union has suspended Ivory Coast from its operations, and opposition leader Alassane Ouattara was sworn in as president, surrounded by United Nations troops last week. The UN says he won the election by more than 10% of the vote. In Haiti, there will be a recount in that election that sent people rioting into the streets after the results came in. The recount will take place with international monitors, according to that country's Provisional Election Council. Most of Haiti's 18 candidates claim the election was corrupted by fraud. Meanwhile, medical experts say the deadly cholera virus that started an outbreak in Haiti may have been brought to the island by United Nations troops or by foreign aid workers. A Harvard researcher says the strain of cholera that killed more than 2,000 people there in recent weeks is similar in DNA to strains found in South Asia. Cholera, which has sickened more than 100,000 people in Haiti, has not occurred there in 100 years of record keeping by the World Health Organization. That's your World Wrap. In your Our News Now flashback, it was 69 years ago this week when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Vince Sanders takes us back to the actions of Dory Miller, a Navy sailor who wasn't trained to fight because of his race, but fought valiantly anyway.
Horace Miller, known to his friends as Dory Miller of Waco, Texas, was the first African-American to earn the U.S. Navy Cross. It all began in 1941 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
All major stations, we are under attack. I repeat, we are under attack.
A surprise attack forced the United States into World War II, as reported by then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Dory Miller was among the personnel assigned to the USS West Virginia as a cook. He was the ship's heavyweight champion as well. As the Japanese continued pounding their target, one of the officers hurriedly assigned Miller to help carry the wounded to safety. Included in that number was the captain of the ship. He was mortally wounded when Miller reached him. Dory Miller went back to the deck while the battle raged on. He managed to make his way to a .50 caliber anti-aircraft machine gun. But because African Americans were not trained in combat operation during those times, Miller had no experience with the big gun. Nonetheless, Miller took the gun in hand and began shooting down some of the Japanese planes. Reports vary on just how many he hit. Even he couldn't tell.
I just pulled the trigger and she worked fine. I guess I fired her for, about 15 minutes. I got some of them. They were diving pretty close.
Of the 1,541 men on the ship that morning, 130 were killed, 52 wounded. Unfortunately, the following year, Dory Miller was killed in action when a Japanese torpedo struck another ship to which he had been assigned. In addition to the Navy Cross for his outstanding bravery, Miller was also entitled to the Purple Heart, the World War II Victory Medal, and several others. The U.S. Navy named a ship for Miller, and the Miller Family Park is located on the U.S. Naval Base at Pearl Harbor. Dory Miller, U.S. War Hero Extraordinary, 1919-1942.
For a complete look at any of the stories you've seen on The Rewind, remember, as always, go to the bottom of the webpage, find the link of the story you'd like to see, and click your way through. That's your Our News Now Rewind for this week. I'm Gary Anthony Ramsay.